Do children even need to see faces? Why do we even have faces? The New York Times has a bold op-ed today, and it's entitled, Actually, Wearing a Mask Can Help Your Child Learn. And it's part of a growing genre I call American delusion, where we have come to no longer think about life in terms of trade-offs, that there are potential benefits and potential downsides, but we become so deluded we have to explain away the downsides as if there are upsides all along, so that our policies are perfect. They can't get better. They have no downsides. They're just pristine. And that's what this article does. It's entitled, Actually, Wearing a Mask Can Help Your Child Learn. And it comes in the face of recent controversy about whether or not babies need to see faces. Now, right now in the United States, in contrast with many of our European colleagues, we have caretakers for young babies wear a mask all day, every day, all the time. So a baby might go 8 to 10 hours a day in the daycare, not seeing the face of a provider. Do they need to see faces? Well, the American Academy of Pediatrics says, as I talked about in a prior video, there's no evidence that they need to see those faces. No one's really proven how harmful it might be to not see those faces. Our friends in the UK, they think it's so ridiculous to do, they haven't even done it. The next thing we do is we mask children who are 2 to 4 years old in this country. That's against the advice of the WHO. That's against the policies of the UK, of Norway, many other nations. And yet we think with absolute certainty that has to be the right thing to do. And it's one thing to say that, we don't know for sure. There are potential upsides. It might slow the spread of SARS-CoV-2. There are potential downsides. Learning, acquisition, communication, socialization might be impaired by this. But on balance, we think in the moment, we ought to do it. Maybe we ought to do it in places with more rip-roaring spread. Maybe we have some nuance to it. That's not how we handle things in the United States. It has to be perfect or terrible. And so now we're spinning the negatives into positives. And this article does that. Let me read you some quotes from it. Quote, "It turns out that looking at eyes is at least as important as looking at mouths to understand whom you are looking at and what they are trying to convey. Eye tracking shows that by age 2, typically developing children spend more than twice as much time looking at eyes as they do mouths." Well, one way to interpret that is that the eyes are twice as important. The other way to interpret that piece of data might be that the mouth is so expressive, even with half as much time, you quickly understand the motivation, and the eyes might take a little bit more time to tease out. The other way to say is that they're still looking at both, so potentially they need to see both, and potentially both communicate something. For instance, do you know that if there was a series of YouTube videos where we were wearing masks and talking, I doubt they'd be as popular as YouTube videos where you see the whole face. In fact, one might wonder why we have faces. I think people have to grapple with the fact that human beings have very expressive faces and a lot of facial musculature to express their views. This is delusion. Let me read you one more quote. "Needless to say, children will not always be perfect at keeping their masks on, but the research on self-control and self-regulation suggests that children who master the skills needed to keep their masks on will grow up to be better at achieving their long-term goals, solving problems, and handling stressful situations." Is that really the case? That children who master keeping the mask on grow up to be CEOs? I think it's an extrapolation from a number of pieces of data that can be questioned. It's also a bit of a ridiculous proposition. And it begs the question that below some level of compliance, you start to wonder whether or not the policy intervention has any net benefit. 2-year-olds in daycare, they wear their masks throughout the daycare day, except those 2 hours where they sleep side by side in beds in the same room with potentially poor ventilation. So what is the purpose of a barrier when you use it for only some of the day, but not some key hours of the day? One might wonder. This has reached the point of insanity. It's gone so far. We are so foolish, so deluded in America that we no longer come to think of the world in any sense of trade-offs. It has to be all perfect or all bad. Alistair Munro from the UK put this. He said, the next article will be, quote, "Chopping children's hands is a great opportunity for them to use their feet." And I think that's where we're headed. This is delusional, people. We need to reconcile the fact that the WHO, the United Kingdom, Norway, Sweden, United States, the AAP, and the CDC have very different ideas about masking young children, about what should be done in front of babies. This is a legitimate area of debate. We need to have data collection. If you believe you ought to do these very draconian restrictions that they do not do in other nations that love children, you need to marshal evidence that these restrictions, as they are implemented, lower the risk of SARS-CoV-2. I think it's a tall order to believe that 2-year-olds wearing masks work when they sleep for 2 hours without them. It's a tall order to believe there is no downside to babies not seeing faces. People who start to think like that, I worry that their brains have stopped working. They're become so political, so tribal. that they have stopped all cognitive processes. If we really slip into this world where these kind of articles can come in the New York Times and people can believe this, I don't know what to say. I have lost a lot of faith in American institutions to protect children. I've been saying that all along. I've lost a lot of faith in scientists to use their noggin. And I think we'll be in a very bad place for a long time to come.